First of all, good afternoon. My name is Carolina Albernaz. I'm Director of Business Development and Operations at the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of the BCCC and FCR Law, we would like to welcome you all here today and thank you for joining us. We have today with us Eduardo Fleury, Philippe Jeffrey, and Renata Harmonia from FCR Law. FCR Law is a Brazilian law firm that advises national and international businesses, entrepreneurs, and investors on almost all aspects of the Brazilian law. They've been working with Canadian companies for a long time now, and their expertise is great in translating Brazilian law to the Canadian market. They will present today an overview of the changes happening in labor and tax legislation in Brazil due to the coronavirus, also known as COVID-19, and the crisis that we're all going through right now. So this webinar will last 45 minutes, and after the presentation is done, we'll open for questions. You can type your questions during the presentation on the Q&A box, and we'll answer in the end. This webinar will also be posted on our website by end of day today, in case you have you need to, or wanted to share with someone. So without further ado, I would like to welcome FCR Law to start their presentation. Thank you so much.
Carolina, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for inviting us to take part of this webinar. And thank you all that are listen and seeing us in this opportunity. And of course, we are passing through difficult times right now. It's very sad what's happening, especially, of course, in the health sector. But even if you have a lot of problems to solve in the health sector, we have to understand that we have to keep the economy running, even in a lower level, but you have to keep the economy running. And that's why many countries issued a lot of measures in order to try to keep the economy running, as I said, even in a, I would say, in a lower level, but you have to protect people that are losing their jobs. You have to protect companies. They cannot be broken with this situation. And so every country is issuing measures to protect the people and the business and so on. Of course, we have a lot of work on the health side, and it's very important that what these guys are doing right now. And of course, they deserve the recognition of all of us in this case. But the idea here is to try to summarize what's happening in Brazil right now, especially in the point of view of the legal measure that was issued by the Brazilian government in order to facilitate the way that the economy is facilitate the business. We'd like to tell you that we have our law firm. We have a special website. It is covid.fcrlaw.com.br, and we have information both in Portuguese and English. And so we can access this website every day in order to have the information necessary to manage things in Brazil. My part of this presentation would be an overview about the measures, and after that we are going to have a presentation of the labor side and tax side. I think it's the most important point that we have to handle right now. Okay. Of course, we see this in this chart, the opportunity to where we have to go. We have to go to the bank, because the bank has to finance the companies. We have to go to the state government, municipalities, and local government and they have to provide health services to the people. We have to provide support to the low-income families. You have to support companies, and so it's this chart we are saying that we have to coordinate everything in this case. What happens in Brazil, as every country, we have a control of the spending that the government can make every year. But of course, with this crisis, we in Brazil issue a kind of a decree where you say that there is a public calamity, and in this sense, the government can spend money as much as they want. Of course, there are certain limits, but they can spend money as much as they want, and we need. And just to give a broad idea what's happening in Brazil, right now, if all the measures that they announced works and they release the money, the idea that the federal government will spend about 750 billion reais, which is kind of 10% of GDP. Just to make a comparison, to compare, in the United States, the package that was issued by the US government, they spent about $2 trillion. Of course, much more money, but it's also comparable to Brazil. Why? Because $2 trillion represents about 10% of GDP of the United States. And so the proportion, of course, every country can spend money as they have money. And so in this case, the measures that Brazilian government issued, they are in proportion, I would say, that what the United States is doing right now. I'm not saying that is enough, but I think it's a good beginning. One thing that is very important in Brazil, that there are many people that they don't have a job, a formal job, and so the government decided to do the following: they will pay a kind of income to these people. They will pay 600 reais. It's more than 50% of the minimum wage. And so the idea is to protect people that they are not formal employed, okay? And the people that are employed, and what we call a micro business, that is very small companies, usually companies with only one people. And so it's one measure that was taken by the government in order to protect the poor people. Also, the retirees, they anticipated the 13th salary, that usually the retirees, they have right to this 13th salary by the end of the year, but in this case, the government allowed the people to anticipate this amount. Okay. The other measure that is very important, that for companies that has a revenue from 360,000 reais to 10 million of reais, they will loan money to these companies, that allowing these companies to pay the payroll. That's one important measure, okay? And it's a loan, it's not a given money, it's not free, but the interest rate for Brazilian partners is very low. They are charging 3.75% per year for Brazilian partners. Again, I would say that is very low interest. And more than this, we have 30 months to pay, and we have 6 months to grace period. So 6 months for starting paying. There are certain limits to these measures, of course, but it's very important. I would say that later on today, Renata will explain about the measures to reduce the working hours in order to reduce the salary. And so if you combine this measure with in the labor side with this measure of the loan, I think we can attend many companies that are in difficult times right now. The other thing that is important, as I said, it's necessary to finance the state government and the municipalities, because part of the health system is provided by state government and health services. Part of the health services is provided by the federal, state government and local government. And so it's important to understand that they have to need to have money for that. And the federal government is releasing money and negotiating certain debits that this government has with the federal government, and so they are flowing money to the state and municipalities. It's a very important measure. There are more lines of credit to small companies. Okay, in this case, not only for the payroll, but also for working capital. And so there are more 45 billion of reais available to small companies in order to finance not only payroll, but also working capital. And as we are going to see in the next explanation with Renata and Deborah, they will talk about the opportunity to reduce the hours, the working hours, and also, of course, in the same proportion, the salaries. And this is a very important measure because, as you are going to see, they try to protect the employee, and also the government will complement the salaries that the company will not pay anymore. And so it's a kind of mix. You are going to reduce the working hours, and the government will complement part of the salary. Also, we have some tax measures. There's a deferral of payroll taxes and also PIS/COFINS. This measure was announced but not published yet, and so we don't have so many details about this measure. But the PIS/COFINS is a very important VAT that is charged by federal government and represents a lot of money for the companies. And also the payroll tax is very important, and the government already decided to deferral. Deferral means you are going to pay in 3 months, but you can pay installments after the 3 months. And so it's also very important. So this is only a general explanation about the main measures that Brazilian federal government is issuing right now. Okay, after that we are going to have Renata and Deborah talking about the labor, and after Felipe is going to talk about the taxation and the measures with more detail, the part of the taxation. Okay, thank you for the opportunity, and now I will hand the handout for Renata, the presentation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to try to explain what is going on in Brazil about labor legislation. My name is Renata Munia. I work in the corporate area, but I also give some assistance to the labor area, as far as have been working with labor law for a long while. So nice to be here, and thank you for your audience. We will start this presentation trying to explain to you 4 definitions that are very important to understand what the Brazilian government has been done here. The new rules that the Brazilian government has issued in these days were based on the 4 definitions that I'm going to try to explain in quick words for you. So under Brazilian law, where you can negotiate with your employees in an individual manner or in a collective manner. So when law allows you to negotiate in the individual manner, you have to to obey some rules, because when you are negotiating individually, law you have to have a higher salary. So what law says is that if you are hyper sufficient, you can negotiate alone by yourself. If you are not hyper sufficient, if you are hypo sufficient, you have to negotiate with the intervention of the union. So to be considered hyper sufficient, you have to receive a greater salary. Or I have to receive a salary about 12,202 reais. And you must have a degree, a study degree. So in these conditions, you are considered hyper sufficient. If you don't obey these conditions, you are considered hyposufficient. So the negotiation between you and your employer must be with the presence of the union. So this is important because when we are going to explain the rules, the new rules, you are going to check how this will apply, keeping in mind that union is also is always something that's difficult to deal with. Unions, they're organized, and sometimes they create some difficulties to let the negotiation flows. So what these new rules try to do is trying to facilitate and include the need of the union presence when it's really necessary. So the next slide, I will explain to you the rules. So these four concepts are very important. The hypersufficient employee, the hyposufficient employee, the collective agreement, and the individual agreement. Sorry. Let's do it again. So Bruno, can you please help me to put in the correct slide? Thank you. Thank you. Next one, please. Thank you. So in this table, I will. It's a summary about what the recent legislation has approved in terms of labor law. So the new rules says is that it's allowed for the employers to reduce the working hours and the wages of the employees. So if you look for the first column, the percentage of reduction can be 25% of salary and wages, 50 or 70%. What the government has approved also is that instead you receive the salary, so you receive a reduction of 25%, and the government will help you, will approve the benefit to the employees, and they receive 25% of the unemployment insurance that we already have in Brazil. So you have to come to this table here to understand the calculation. So the government aid calculation takes as a basis for calculation the salary of the employee, and you receive you have to calculate which will be your benefit. So after you calculate the benefit, you apply the percentage of 25% and you add to your salary. So what government is doing, they are not paying the full amount of the complement to the regular salary. What they are doing, they are going to pay 25% of the benefits that you would receive if you are unemployed. So for this first line, what I can explain to you is that if you have a reduction of 25%, you're gonna add to your regular salary the benefit of the government. This can be done for everyone, hyposufficient or hypersufficient, individually with your employee or with the union participation. But it's legally to make this negotiation individually. And the maximum period of time that this benefit will stand will be 90 days. So up to 90 days, the government will pay this 25% and is allowed to the employees to reduce the salary and to reduce the working hours. The same thing applies to the 50 and the 70%. The only difference is like the percentage that if you have a greater reduction, you're gonna receive a greater government aid, take into account this basis here. But now it's necessary to have the intervention of the union. So uh, for these employees that will receive a larger reduction in salary, they have to be this negotiation must count with the participation of the union, and the same thing applies to the 70%. So all this percentage of reduction will be enforced up to the maximum of 90 days. And if something good happens and employers wants to stop this, they have to inform the employee, and things goes to the normality in 2 days after the employer notifies the employees. So this is one of the major points of the labor measures: reduction of working hours and reduction of wages. The second point that we are going to show to you is that the government also allowed the suspension of the employment contract. So suspension of the full working hours, so the employee will be home. These employees won't need to go to work. So this situation, the suspension of the employment contract, has to respect this criteria. Like if the company has an annual gross revenue up to 4.8 million of reais, the wages will be suspended also. No, it's not necessary that the employer pay anything to the employee, and the government aid will be 100%. The same calculation that I showed you in the previous slide. So the employee that is under this situation will receive the employment aid in 100% for 2 months at most, 60 days at most. So this can be agreed individually with employees that receive that are considered hyper-sufficient. Remembering that this hyper-sufficiency is for employees that earns more than 12,202 reais, or to employees that receive up to 3,117 reais also. And this happens because the employment insurance will be almost full cover the regular salary. So for these two situations, law allows that this negotiation takes its course in an individual agreement without the participation of the union. In other situations, for the other employees, this suspension of payments must be done with a collective agreement, meaning that the union must participate. So if your company has the second line, if your company has a annual gross revenue over than 4.28 million, it's necessary that the employer pays 30% of the employee's salary, and the government aid will be only 70% of the insurance and employment insurance. The same conditions, so the same condition applies for the first explanation. Hyper-sufficient and employers receive less than this amount showed here. They don't need to have the participation of the union. This can be also negotiated between employer and employee. Other employees, they must, this negotiation must go through a collective agreement and the union must participate. This situation, suspension of the employment agreement, can be enforced for up to 60 days at maximum. So that was what I have, my contribution for this presentation. And now I let you with Dr. Débora. He's a specialist in labor law, and he will clarify other points about the recent new rules of in labor law. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so our labor legislation granted annual leaves after 12 months of the date of the first working day. That is called the vesting period. So the employer must notify the employee to granting of vacation 30 days in advance. The payment of vacation must be within 2 days before granting the vacation. And the payment of the 1/3 bonus vacation must be paid within 2 days before granting the vacation. So here, as you can see, the Executive Decree 927 have relaxed such rules and deadline, making more flexible. So the grant period can be granted even to the employees whose full extra period has not yet lapsed. So the annual leave now can be paid in advance. The employer must notify the employee of the grantee of vacation 48 hours in advance. The payment of vacation may be made by the 5th business days of the month following enjoyment, and the employers may choose to pay the 1/3 bonus vacation by the date of payment of the 13th salary. As I said it before, this concerns only to the main rules, so there are other rules to be observed. Moving on, I would like to talk about teleworking, or as we usually use here, home office. That consists of the option of work at a distance, allowing the performance of the employee activities be predominantly outside the company's premises. Such modality of job performance has its own rules in our labor legislation, in which provides some ground rules to put into practice. Here we brought the main rules, but there are other rules to be observed. So in our labor legislation, the employee must agree and sign an amendment to the employment contract to convert in-person work to teleworking. The employer must notify the employee 15 days in advance, and it must be provided on the employment agreement a guidance on health and safety regulations. As you can see, such rules are relaxed in the Executive Decree 927, and the teleworking can be applied by the employer regardless of an amendment to the employment contract to convert in-person work to teleworking. The employer must notify the employee in written 48 hours in advance. There is a possible extension of teleworking to interns and apprentices, and it's not mandatory to have provided in the agreement a guidance on health and safety regulation, although it is advisable to provide because our labor legislation is very strict with that guidance. So, and at last, we are going to talking of another important measure provided of the Executive Decree 927 to face the crisis in the contractual sphere, in which consists of the suspension of the requirement to pay the FGTS with respect to March, April, and May of 2020. These amounts may be paid in installments. To be paid in installments, it must be, it can be split to 6 monthly installments due on the 7th day of each month, starting on July of 2020. This suspension is not linked to a prior authorization from the employee, trade union, or government, and does not require any specific procedure to be deployed. However, in order to enjoy the installment plan, the employer must declare to the government by June of this year, June 20th of this year, the information that will constitute a declaration recognition of the debts. And the amounts that are not declared will be in areas and will result in a legal penalties for the company and charges due. So this is a basic overview of the main aspects on the executive decree. There are other flexible rules, but we here brought only the main rules. And now we're going to talk about some measures that were made in tax, and Felipe will continue. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Deborah. Good afternoon to everyone that is connecting to this webinar. Bruno, if you can go to the following slide. So to introduce myself, my name is Philippe Jeffrey. I'm a tax partner at FCR Law. I'm also responsible for the Canadian desk. So FCR Law provides services to a lot of Canadian companies, and we can service obviously those companies in French and English and Portuguese. So to conclude this presentation, I will review together with you the main tax measures that have been issued by the authorities so far in connection with the COVID-19. If we take a look quickly about the main objective of what has been issued so far, the first one is, as much as possible, reduce taxation, the applicable taxations on product and equipment necessary to combat the crisis. The possibility for the taxpayers to defer payment of some of the taxes. And also from a custom perspective, the possibility to import, let's say on a fast track system, also the equipment and the products that are needed for the crisis. So the main objective are this. You will see that the measure that have been issued so far are quite similar to the Canadian measures, the US measures. I think all the governments are focusing on the main items. So I will review with a little bit more details each of those measures. Next slide, please. So regarding tax reductions, the authorities have agreed to reduce the federal excise tax on product necessary to counter the COVID-19. There's a reduction also, this was discussed a little bit by Eduardo and by Deborah about the social contributions on payrolls. So there's a reduction of 50% of the employer contribution to the S systems that we refer to in Brazil. And yesterday, the authorities have issued legislations reducing the applicable financial tax on credit operations. So the rate normally is max at 1.5% on financing operations in Brazil. The rate of that tax has also been reduced to 0%. Regarding tax payments, we have a regime in Brazil that we call Simples Nacional in Portuguese. Those the companies eligible for that, and this is a system that is used to calculate corporate income tax. So small and medium-sized companies in Brazil that are nationally owned can use that system. And so far, the payment of the federal taxes linked to that system have been extended for 6 months. FGTS, Deborah explained quite well to you guys, but also there's a possibility to defer the payment to the FGTS. And PIS/COFINS are social contributions, federal social contribution on gross revenue. The authorities have issued their opinion that the payment of those contributions will also be deferred for the month of April, May, and August, but we're still waiting for the legislation to be issued to confirm the deferral of the payment of those contributions. From the customs side, also similar to the federal excise tax, there's a reduction of the import duty to 0% to product and equipment necessary for the crisis. And also the authorities have simplified the procedure to import. So the goods and equipment necessary for the crisis can be cleared on a faster manner. And also the authorities have waived prior approval on certain goods only, but for certain goods, there's a waiver of the approval of the health authorities for the import. Now, regarding there's installment tax program, the next item on my slides here. For those who do not know, often-wise the authorities offers to taxpayers the possibility to pay their tax debt in monthly installment. So for existing debt that have been recognized by the authorities, the program can be paid, or the plan would prevail a payment in 97 monthly installment payments. Tax clearance certificate, obviously, because of what's happening down here, the tax clearance certificate that have been issued so far, their validity has been extended for an additional 90 days period. Tax litigation, obviously, all tax proceedings have been suspended so far until the end of April 30th. And also regarding the action for the collections, there's a suspension of 90 days currently. Lastly, tax compliance. A lot of you that has operations in Brazil knows how the burden of the tax compliance is heavy in Brazil. So obviously a lot of, and also for those who do not know, taxes are levied in Brazil at the federal, at the state, and at the municipal level. So the ancillary tax obligations in a lot of states and municipalities have been relaxed. But for those who has operation in Brazil should check on a daily basis, because the legislation is issued on a daily basis regarding state and the municipality where they do business, to see if the ancillary tax obligations have been relaxed. So those are the main tax measures so far that have been published. Again, I thank you very much for your time. And I think now, Carol, you will see some of the questions that have been posted.
So we got one here. So are the taxes for foreign technology services affected? I think that's for you, Philip.
Can you just repeat the question, Carol? I'm not sure.
So are taxes for foreign technology services affected? Any changes?
No. So if there's a payment for technologies or services that is made from Brazil to Canada, so far nothing of the applicable taxes, and let's say that those taxes are quite high, but for the time being, those taxes are still applicable the way that it was before the crisis.
Perfect. Thank you, Philippe. Another question here on taxation. Does the waiver of import tax also apply to oil field equipments?
This needs to be checked on the case because the list is quite extensive. So depending on the products and goods, but normally those are medical devices and product use during the crisis. Those are the main, but this needs to be again checked because again, the list is quite extensive of the different type of product that can benefit from the tax reduction.
Okay, perfect. About the union negotiation. So how is the union negotiation being held remotely? Do you have any information on that, Renata and Deborah?
So I can give some experience. We have a few experiences with this recently. Usually the unions has been calling the companies to try to, especially with restaurants. We have an experience with restaurants. They call at the companies and asking for proposing some things in case of restaurants that were the first industry affected with the crisis. But now this should be remote or with digital documentation. Nobody is trying to incentivize people to get together. So it will be made by telephone and digital copies of documentation. I believe so.
Thank you. Another question, in your opinion, do you think these changes will be permanent after the COVID? We heard about labor changes and there's like updates in the labor law. This is anything that might stay after this?
I will answer, but Deborah can also help me. These measures that you just explained to you are for a very limited period of time. So suspension of labor contracts are for 60 days, and reduction of salaries and working hours for 90 days. So this is very, very specific for this time. The other measures that Deborah explained to you is the same. They are very specific for this area. We are not, we cannot say about future if what's going to happen with the the homework, the distance work. Maybe this comes to become more regular in Brazil, but we can't say that will be that it will survive after the crisis is over. But from my opinion, the homework office is coming for stay for a bigger lack of time, a bigger period of time.
Yeah, just in addition, this measure made by the government, they're made specifically to during this state of public calamity, which is called, we have a provision already in our labor legislation that it's called force majeure. So that's why they were made for such a specific moment. And even if they come part into the law, they will be only due to this during a state of public calamity and force majeure.
Thank you. So I assume that all these, one of the next questions, all these new legislation has already been approved. Do you have any timeline on when the payments are going to start to happen from the government side in terms of the support that they're going to give on the reduction of salaries and stuff?
Such measures can be applied immediately. So you have to observe the requirement for each measure because as Renata told, each percentage have its own rules, but it can be applied immediately, only to observe the rules for each percentage.
About
Carolina, I'd
Yeah.
like to highlight about this question that you just made.
Please.
Of course, the negotiation with the union or even the agreement, individual agreement with the employees, I think it's possible to manage right now. What I am a little bit afraid is how long will it take to the government start paying the compensatory measures, okay? That's something that I am afraid that I don't think that they will start doing this next week. They said that they will do this next week, but I don't believe. So that's the one point that can not work as they announced.
Only a complementary information. What law says, let's see if the government will work to make this come to reality. That you have to make these agreements with your employees, collective or individual agreements, and in 10 days, and you have to communicate this to the government, and in 30 days they will start to pay the benefits. So in 30 days after you inform the government, they will start the payment. But we are hearing here in Brazil that they will have some trouble with the filings they have there, with the to control this. But what this law says is they will pay in 30 days. Let's see.
Thank you. Another question here. If it was a little bit of a confusion, is it possible to apply the employment suspension for employees making more than the 3,117 reais? How this would work and what would the government cover? So it wasn't really clear for him on how the compensation, the payment for the suspension would work. If you can go back to re-explain that for us, please.
Okay, I will explain again. If Deborah can help me also, please.
Okay.
The employee earns more than 3,117 reais, they can have the suspension of the salary. What it will work like, the rules go to the criteria of the revenue, the gross revenue of the companies. So they can have a suspension on their salary 100%, and what he will receive is the same amount that he will receive with the unemployment insurance. So he receive he will receive a lower amount of his salary because he will be under the rules of the insurance, the unemployment insurance. But if the company has a gross revenue greater than 4.8 million reais, the company is obliged to pay 30% of the salary, and to this amount will be added the unemployment aid of 70% of the benefit. The calculation of the benefit is explained in one slide. So we have a special rules to calculate your benefit. So maybe this is I'm trying to explain. I don't know if it was clear.
Just to add the information that Renata just said, that in this case, Renata, we need to have a collective agreement with the union. We have to have an agreement with union, okay?
Yes. So there is two things to observe: the gross revenue of the company and the salaries between 3,117 reais and 2,202 reais. It must be through collective bargaining. Every other salary lower than 3,117 reais or higher than 2,202 reais, it is possible to be implemented through an individual agreement.
Perfect. So if the individual makes less than 3,117 reais or more than 12,000 reais, they can go through individual agreements. If it's between the bracket of 3,000 and 12,000, it has to be through the union, correct?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope it's Esteban, if this is not clear, like let me know and we can always try to bring the discussion offline as well. We have another question that I don't know, it's 100% into the subject of COVID, but it's about the LGPD and the Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados. So the question here, do you believe that they will keep the legislation valid throughout this process and after like 2020, during 2020 and after August, that's supposed to expire?
Yeah, hi Carolina, this is Bruno from FCR Law speaking. I think I can answer this. We still don't have a definition about this topic, but there are some law proposals to postpone the validity of the LGPD, but because of the crisis, and we still don't have a national agency of data protection here in Brazil. So this agency is really important in order to clarify some aspects of the data protection legislation in Brazil. So in my personal opinion, I believe this is the legislation will be postponed. The validity of the LGPD will be postponed, maybe to 2021, maybe to later. But we still don't have any confirmation. We have just these proposals. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Just to add to that, I just received a new information that the legislation was just approved. The Brazilian Senate just approved the proposal to postpone the legislation up to 2021, the 1st January of 2021. So it's going to go to the chambers of the National Congress, but it's a movement, you know. Maybe this is gonna happen.
Perfect, thank you. So since we have no more questions pending here and we are on time, I would like to thank you all, Eduardo, Philip, Renata, Deborah, Bruno, for being here with us today for this beautiful presentation. And as mentioned before, we will have the presentation with their contact information as well, the recording of this webinar on our website by end of day today. And we'll send you all an email with as soon as it's posted. We kindly ask you to keep engaging with us, follow us on social media. We'll be posting many other webinars on different topics to cover both the impact of COVID in Brazil and Canada, as well as some industry updates from now on. So we are going to, because of that, and we've been working remotely, and we're moving all our events that were planned until end of July to online. So keep following our social media posts, keep engaging with us, and we hope to see you in our next webinar soon. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon, a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you for the opportunity.